Let's go ahead and get started on Unity Lesson 2. So one of Unity's free tutorials, Rollerball, was great help in developing this lesson. It's a good introduction to working with game objects, components, definitely scripting, but it's written in C#, so we did make some edits. And we're going to drastically modify the game starting in Lesson 3. So let's start with the layout of our game, creating this plane and creating our sphere to roll on it. We're first going to open Unity and create a new project, no assets needed, and we're going to call this project Adventure Game. So new project, Adventure Game. I'm calling mine Adventure Game 2 because I made Adventure Game 1 already. You can see this is a 3D game. No asset packages are needed. Make sure you know where yours is saving to. I actually just want mine to save to my documents and not my desktop. I'll go ahead and create that project. Just like we did with our last code, we're going to File, Save As, Scene 1. As a reminder, a scene is like a level in a game. If you're playing with a game without levels, let's say you're playing like Skyrim, Scene 1 might be a town, being in the streets of a town, and if you enter a building, that might be Scene 2, right? And so each time you kind of change location like that and a new, like a loading screen pops up, that would be considered like a separate scene. You're going to right-click down in your Assets folder and create a folder called Scenes. This just keeps your Assets folder nice and clean and organized. And again, if you ever need to rename anything, if it's be it a game object or a folder, you simply select the folder and hit Enter on your keyboard or Return on your keyboard, and it should allow you to rename that. A reminder of our view controls. You can pan, orbit, and zoom. Pan is like a flat move. Orbit allows you to kind of tilt as though you're on the outside of a sphere, and zoom lets you zoom in or zoom out. To pan, orbit, zoom, you can use the hand tool. Just click with the mouse once you're using the hand tool to pan. Hold down Alt to orbit when you're using the pan tool, and hold down Alt and right-click to zoom. Or you can just hold down the middle mouse button to pan. No matter what tool you're using, you can right-click with the mouse to orbit or use your mouse wheel to zoom. Okay. We're going to start by creating a 3D plane. Your game tab should already be over here because you moved it last time. But, oh goodness gracious, what did I do here? In case it's not, you're going to click and drag it so that it looks like this gray area here. Okay, there we go. If it looks like this, make sure your layout is default. And you can click and drag that game tab over to the side. Not like this, so it's a separate window, but like this, so that it fits next to your scene. Again, this is what the user or player is going to see, and this is what you as the programmer sees as you edit your scene. We're going to add a plane game object, not plain like plain Jane, but plain like the mathematical term for a flat geometric shape here. As a reminder, everything in the game is a game object, from the player and the background music to power-ups. And every game object is composed of components. And the inspector tool allows us to modify in terms of position, rotation, and scale. Inspector, I know it says tool, you really should say window here. Inspector window is very helpful. I'm just kidding. just call it the inspector. We're going to start by resetting all the transformations to make sure it's in the center of the world. And we're going to double the size of the plane. So we will hit the gear and reset, make sure it's at 0, 0, 0, not rotated. To double this plane, I'm going to use my inspector over here and change the scale of the X and the Z to 2 so that it doubles along the X and the Y. You could set the Y to be double, or you could even set it to be times 100, but it's not going to change. And that's because planes are infinitely flat. You cannot make them tall at all. It's the nature of a plane. If you wanted to make something that could get taller, kind of thicker, you could say, infinitely thin, you would have added a cube and not a plane. But this is just the ground, so that's what we need it to be, and notice how it adds a nice little ground for our world the player sees. Okay, and we don't actually need to see the grid. It can be a little distracting since this is only going to be our world. So under gizmos here, we're going to turn the grid off. You'll still see the grid if you click on your plane, but not if you don't. Notice that even if the grid was on, your player wouldn't see it. It's just for the programmer or the game designer. All right, now we're going to make a sphere that is going to be our player eventually. So game object, add a 3D object, and we'll make it a sphere. We want to make sure it's at the center of the world, and we want to move it up so that it's resting on the ground. And there are several questions I want you to consider before you see what I do. I want you to think, how do we do this? What are we going to do to move the sphere up? What axis are we considering? And how far should we make this move? We want to reset, and then we want to use the position transform, and we want to move up or down. We want to move up, so we want to use the y-axis. Our sphere is 1 unit by 1 unit by 1 unit. So to move it up so that it's right sitting on top of the ground, you may think, okay, move it up 1 unit. Well, that would mean that it's up over the ground, because it starts out half above ground and half below, right? Half above. So we want that half below to be on top. So we move it up by half a unit. So now the whole thing is sitting on our plane. Sphere is 1 unit in diameter. Since it starts with half under the plane, move it up by 0.5 on the vertical y-axis. The sphere is difficult to see, so let's add some color to the ground so we can better distinguish it. To do that, we're going to add a material. Again, we want to keep our assets folder clean, so we're going to add a materials folder as well. So right-click down in your assets area and create a folder, and we're going to call it materials. Double-click, right-click, and create a material inside your materials folder. We're going to call this material plain color. And up in the inspector window, with the plain color selected, you are going to click the little color box next to albedo, and you want a nice dark blue. Later, you can make this whatever color you want, but for now, just to make sure that for consistency's sake as we're learning, I want everybody to choose a nice dark blue. There are 2 ways that we can add this color to our plane. The first is to click and drag it onto our scene and just directly onto the plane itself. I just Command C or Control Z to undo that. The second is to click the plane in our hierarchy window and click and drag the material on top of the Add Component button. Notice that even material or color is a component for each game object. Now we have our beautiful blue floor. We're going to rotate the directional light, which will also help us see the ball a little better. How do we do that? Select the directional light. And I want you to change the rotation from -30 on the y-axis to 60. Yes, so it should be 50, 60, 0, 0, 3, 0. Zero, C, 0 for the position, 50, 60, 0 for the rotations. Okay. Our next goal is to write a script that will allow us to control the ball's movement based on keyboard input from the player. And luckily, Unity is set up so that this isn't too difficult for us to do. First step, create a scripts folder. Again, we want our assets to be clean. You don't want to create this folder inside of materials, so select the assets folder, the main folder, and then create a folder that we'll call scripts. Remember, if you feel like my pace is too fast for you, always you can pause, make the changes, and then hit play again. It's a great thing about a recording. This is going to be a script that will affect the movement of the sphere. So I want to click the sphere here and hit Add Component. We're going to make a new script. Now make sure there's a few things, this is really important. You want yours to be called Player Move, but you want to be really careful with your capitalization. Just for today, make it Player is all lowercase letters. There's no space, and the M in move is capitalized. I'll explain why this is so important in just a moment. For language, choose JavaScript, and then select Create and Add. Notice in your Assets area, Player Move is not in your Scripts folder. It is attached to your sphere, so just select the file and click and drag it into your Scripts folder. You can then open your Scripts folder, and you'll see Player Move there. The JS lets you know that this is in JavaScript. And you can double click it. And this should open in just a moment. Be patient. Mono-develop. Mine's being a little sluggish today. Automatically should open for you. Okay, and you start with some code that automatically is added. We're going to delete that all except the code on line 1, which reads pragma strict.